Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I'm going to switch the conversation from resilience of the ecological type to resilience of the humankind, and that's my work. So my work is focused on flourishing, human flourishing, and what does that mean? But today's topic is about what I call grace and resilience. These are two words that don't usually go together. But I'd like to introduce these two concepts to you as a new way of leadership, a new way of taking leadership into organisations and corporates that have equal value for their people, for the prosperity of the organisation, and for the future of the planet, because those three things are critical to all of us. So I'd like to start with really introducing grace and resilience as a new world by redefining what it is to lead. And what I mean by grace, because normally that's associated to religion, the divinity of God and what God's benevolence brings to us. But I'd like to introduce another way of thinking about grace today. Because out of my 35 years of experience of working in business and the corporate sector in some of the toughest industries and sectors in the world, I've worked in India and Bangladesh on the ground where women have been subjugated and marginalised for decades, centuries. I've worked in the oil and gas industry where people's lives are at risk by simply going to work. How do they survive these circumstances, and how do each of us, given what you've heard today from my colleagues, what do we do about the situation that we're now faced with as demands increase and our challenges rise as we face our day-to-day lives? So I'm moving into the social sciences. So if we look at the one definition or a way to interpret grace and resilience, it's the dynamic flow of grace, which I call what was traditionally referred to as feminine qualities, in balance with resilience, which are the masculine, traditionally referred to as masculine, the brave, the strong, the assertive, the toughen up, the booted up, we can do it sort of resilience. But I've come to see that without the quality of grace, we are not working very well. In fact, often I use the saying, the way we're working isn't working. Who would agree with that? Anyone? The way we're working isn't working. We have to change the way we live. We have to change the way we lead to face the unknown and the challenges we now have in front of us. And so when I look at these qualities of grace, what I refer to as inclusivity, deep listening, my colleague Cilla Elworthy referred to listening this morning. That's one of the feminine qualities. We need the bravery and courage of the masculine. But let's see how both of these work together hand in hand. So one, we need societies and enterprises that value diversity, eradicates inequalities and discrimination, and ensures human flourishing, business prosperity and planetary regeneration, and that they're all of equal value. So as we look into the world today, one of the terms that's being used in corporate especially is that they're talking about having to face a VUCA world. What does VUCA mean? That acronym means volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And leaders are trying to figure out now in organisations how they build resilience in their teams and how they take this forward. But before we look at how do we build resilience, let's look at what got us here. So what we've adopted and how we've adapted. Firstly, there was the Industrial Revolution. We're all told that through mechanisation we would have more leisure time. I don't know many people that are feeling like they've got much more leisure time these days. Mostly when I talk to people, they feel like they're on 24/7. No divide between their personal and their professional lives. I'm sure many of you here feel like that. And in fact, even today, you've been listening to all of us as speakers very generously, patiently, but there's a lot to take in. And that's what our world is facing, but we have to look at the personal level. And then in corporates, the military was adopted as a way of leading, and that suggested we needed to be strategic, there was a hierarchy, there was a dictatorship in many occasions, and it was instructional. And that model was adopted by many corporate leaders. And then we have technology. It gives us efficiency and speed and supposedly connectivity, but many people are now on their devices versus looking into each other's eyes to communicate. So how do we change this? And then finally, the one that's more recent is the athletic model. And in the athletic model, it suggests that we need to build teams. Well, I'd like to shift that notion from building teams for what we can build in organisations to building community. And this morning it's been spoken about as well. We need to actually go away from the old model of team, where only the best are chosen and teams compete. And that's a message that's conveyed through team building. Where community building is about people where they share their values and they have a shared purpose. What are the consequences of that? What I see is absenteeism and presenteeism. That's a relatively new term. Not a lot of people are aware of what that means. But absenteeism is costing millions, if not billions of dollars. And presenteeism, we know what absenteeism is, but presenteeism is when people actually show up to work and they're not really there. And I know many of you in this room have been on conference calls for your work, but you've been doing emails at the same time. We're not really present. We're not really in the meeting. How many times have you sat with a colleague and you want to present something and you were talking to them and they're on their phone or they're on their device? We're not really there. We're not really listening. And that's causing a huge impact in productivity and a huge impact in engagement. And I'm seeing this across all organisations that I work in. What provokes change? If I suggest to you that, if I suggest to you that there's in a normal, whatever normal is these days, normally we can make decisions based on our conscious choices, our desires, our aspirations. But unfortunately, now what's happening is what's driving our decisions are the bottom four. And the bottom four especially are threat, trauma, crisis and pressure. And where we're experiencing that is in our everyday lives. Through the terrorism we hear about, the newspapers we read, the business circumstances we're confronted with. And what that's activating in our systems is fear. We cannot make decisions, the right decisions for our lives, for our families, for our future, based on fear. So why I'm suggesting and why I'm putting forward this new hypothesis of leadership with grace and resilience is critical. So pausing there for a moment, because I've been speaking a lot, I'd like everyone just to take a deep breath for a moment. I'm not going to speak, just take a deep breath. Breath is our way to restore, move from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex, where we can make more sensible, rational decisions, not based on fear. But we have an incredible mechanism in our system to actually build our resistance through our physical, emotional, mental and spiritual resources. Our inner resources can build our resilience. But I'd like to go back briefly to how I began, because I'm not a scientist and I don't come from academia. I am a healer. I started a business in the 80s in Australia based on my profession, which was aromatherapy. I'd done many, many trainings. I was an aerobic instructor. I'd focused on all the alternative healing methodologies. And I built a business to train women to honour their bodies as sacred and use essential oils to be healers in the home. On that context and on that premise, the business we built became an $8.5 million business exporting products to 5 countries by training women to be healers of the home. For 13 years, I worked with women and I built that business proudly. We changed an industry in Australia. After the business was sold, I came to the UK, went to the UK, and I started working with oils of a different kind out of the ground, the extractive industries. So from oils out of plants to oils out of the ground, 13 years with women, 15 years with all men, male-dominated, very, very tough industries. I was also a competitive cyclist. I could ride with the best of the bunches. I competed in the World Masters because I'd been taught as a little girl not to be sensitive. I'd been taught as a little girl that I could do anything. But the subtext was by my father, you should do everything. And so I did. I tried to end hunger. I worked on the subjugation and marginalisation of women. I built a multi-million-dollar business, and the list went on. Why I've got the pause sign up is because I had a very big pause 4 years ago. I kept saying I need a break, and I got one. I fell down a flight of stairs and broke my back. I was shocked, traumatised. The doctors told me I'd be fine in 3 months. Sure, the brace helped me. I got braced up every day, and I told myself I could be resilient. Sadly, I learnt about grace through a very harsh accident. I learnt that you need healing. We all need healing when we've been through trauma, and that is grace. When we pause, we listen to others, we listen to the pain and suffering of the world, and we look at how we can heal ourselves, first here and then to others. And when everyone said to me, of all people, Karen, you'll do great, I said, could you give me a minute? Can we give ourselves a minute to breathe, to bring grace? And what I mean by that, from moving from the old to the new, the old version of grace is the capacity, the definition, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, and also the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape. Well, I didn't spring back into shape. Before I had the accident, I considered myself an athlete. After that, it took me 2 years emotionally to recover from that trauma. But I knew how to heal because I went to the cause of the suffering. I didn't just try to bounce back and step over the pain and step over the grief. And we've been talking about ecology and the seasons today. Don't we have seasons of the soul? Haven't you been through a winter in your heart when you've had to grieve over a loved one, when you've actually had to take time off work because you're not doing so great? And we don't respect the seasons of the soul. I believe this is a critical way that leaders have to embrace their people. They have to embrace not this old version, but the new version of resilience. And the new version of resilience is to be able to develop positive character strengths and virtues through adversity. Not to push through and step over and ignore emotions, but to heal ourselves. To take time with grace to bring compassion to others, to empathise with them and to listen to them in order that they can restore themselves. Because when people are seen, heard and known, they feel valued. And when people are valued, they prosper and they bring the best of themselves to work. So that's why I call this a new paradigm of leadership. And the second definition, as you can see, is a commitment to intentionally expand our human capacity to live a more fulfilling and meaningful life. I think we all want that. But we forget that we've got responsibilities ourselves for our physical well-being, our emotional agility, our mental focus and clarity, and our spirit, which is our meaning and purpose. Does everyone here have meaningful work they do? Do you get up with a purpose and a bounce in your step to go to whatever it is you do? And grace, the old version, unmerited divine assistance given humans for their regeneration or sanctification, a virtue coming from God. A state of sanctification enjoyed through divine assistance. Well, I actually believe the divine assistance is everywhere. It's with you, it's with you, it's with the planet. It's all around us if we let ourselves forget about this skin bag, but remind ourselves we're all connected and we're all in it together. So the new definition of grace, or the new interpretation of grace, moving from the benevolence of God to the compassion we have for each other, our species and our planet. From the Latin word gracia, which is like gracias, but it actually, if we deepen the understanding of that, it is grateful, gratitude, graceful, gracious, all of these beautiful words, which I call the feminine. And it's like a dynamic flow from the feminine to the masculine. There's no right or wrong, there's no polarities, because I can be feisty and brave and courageous, but I also need to be mindful, sensitive and compassionate. I can be honest, but honesty played out to its extreme can be cruelty. If it's not balanced with compassion, it's not whole and complete. So as I talk about grace and resilience, I want to also remind us of where our greatest reminder of resilience comes from, and that's nature. Mother Nature knows grace and resilience and has been working hard for over 3 billion years. And so we do know what resilience is when we look to Mother Nature. So a tree grows primary growth tall, secondary growth wide. I know some of you are sitting there going, yeah, I'm a little too wide, but maybe that's not the breadth we need physically. The breadth we need is emotionally. The breadth we need is being able to take in the pain and suffering of the world. And you've heard some statistics today that are frightening. How do we deal with that? How do we embrace that? How do we move forward and not be paralysed by it? That's the sort of resilience we need. Being able to embrace what's coming at us, embrace the unknown. And the tree does that so beautifully. So what's your secondary growth? How are you growing and developing those capacities you have control over? Because we can't control what's happening to us, but we can control and manage what's happening inside of us. So the future, I believe, is a living system model, not the industrial revolution model, not the team building model, not the military model, but a living system model, where in organisations we know that the people are the heartbeat of the organisation. We know that each person makes their valuable contribution and we value them for that contribution. And that is a living system where we recognise and respect diversity, we include others, the least and the best, all of them, to empower them to bring their best to work. And we've got, as we build communities, where people are valued, that becomes a living system of human beings, just as Mother Nature does, respects those qualities. So my premise is, and I go into organisations teaching this, preaching it, being an activist for it, is it doesn't look like it now. It doesn't look like human beings are flourishing. What it looks like to me, they're surviving or languishing. How can we move in our organisations, in our lives, in our families, in our communities to truly flourishing? And I believe that human flourishing and business prosperity are inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other. Gone are the days where people are seen as resources, and some companies, instead of calling their heads of HR human resources, they call them human remains. Instead of human resources now, it's that bad. I've been in companies where I've heard about statistics of suicide. Absenteeism, as you saw the statistic before, is costing billions. How can we build these organisations? How can we build leaders that can lead with grace and resilience? So the final one, as I move into the last part of my talk, is that health and well-being is spoken politically. It's a concern for politicians. It's a concern for global leaders. But I think more importantly, we should be focused on flourishing. Because health, as you see up there, is the definition of health is the absence of disease or injury. We know what to do. There are 30,000 diets produced or written about, but we have an obesity problem in the world. Why is that? Information makes no difference to action. If we're willing to take responsibility, not for the planet, but start with ourselves, start with the resources we have, these wonderful resources that we can regenerate. And then we move into well-being, which is a state of comfort, to be healthy and happy. But that's not sustainable either, because without meaning and purpose, people don't thrive. So flourishing is a way of being which is developing rapidly and successfully and thriving. And that's personally what I'm interested in working with business leaders, as I'm seeing now evidence for in the UK, where a company's just stretched right out to train 2,000 of their people that my team and I are now delivering to have them flourish. Imagine, what will that take? That's a tough call. But I think if we don't look at this, the companies that I'm seeing where they're losing people from absenteeism, mental health, and critically, they are suffering in their families through the workload that they're taking on. So, invite you to, to be enchanted with life. It's difficult to be busy and enchanted at the same time. Enchantment invites us to pause and be arrested by whatever is before us. Instead of doing something is done to us. So when you go home this evening, it's a practice. Look at your loved one, whether it's a dog or a partner or a child. and be enchanted by them. Be in wonder about who they are and enliven your relationship. And that starts the process of flourishing. So cultivating grace and resilience, in the most difficult times, ask yourself not what I'm expecting from life, but what does life expect of me? That's what I asked myself when I broke my back. For a while, I blamed the circumstances. Why me? Why this? Why now? And then I asked myself, what's life expecting of me? And I discovered grace. And that was a blessing in my life. So the last one, what is it for you that is beautiful and worth saving? I really ask you to ponder that for a moment. What's beautiful and worth saving? And what's most precious and important to you that is worth protecting? Really. So I'd like to leave you with a film in my answer to those two questions and invite you to just contemplate this for a moment. So if I could please have the movie on.